So I want to talk about Denmark Vesey, and I think you directly connect the Missouri Compromise debates, which energize the enslaved and free people of color in Washington, D.C., because they heard the debates in Congress. They heard those words used. They heard that the folks in power did not want to have a public debate about history. So where are we with Denmark Vesey? Well, Vesey cherished a copy of that Rufus King speech. Rufus King, a representative from New York, and Rufus King had supported the Talmadge Amendment, the one that was going to stop the movement of more slaves in the Missouri and put it on a path of gradual emancipation. We know that did not happen. We know about the compromise and the fact that the compromise was nearly undone by the actions of the state of Missouri that denied the movement of black citizens who were free from one state to another, until Missouri said, oh, if you're a citizen of the state you came from, you can come into Missouri. And then they just, by 1847, they banned all free black settlers. So the second compromise, which almost threatened to derail the Missouri Constitution, was basically undone 20 years later. And by that point, no one stopped it in Congress. No one stopped it in Congress. So where are we with all of this? There was talk that there was a plan for Bastille Day, June 14th, 1822, for this conspiracy to actually be a reality in Charleston, South Carolina. Now, the other connection that Vesey has that's critically important is that he is a member and a leader of the AME, African Methodist Episcopalian Church of Charleston. It's a free institution of those blacks in Charleston that make folks nervous. Go ahead. Sure, the AME Church is the African Methodist Episcopalian, an institution that exists to this day. You can see the signs everywhere across the United States, AME churches. Really, it's a legacy, I would call it a legacy, of the First Great Awakening.
Like a combination of the Methodists and the Episcopals,
The history formation of it, I'm not that familiar with, but I mean, I know Methodism is from John Wesley in England. Comes around the same time, of course, as the Baptist faith, which is a new faith which is interesting that you mentioned that, Brittany, because the Episcopal Church is the established church in the Southern colonies, the official tax-supported church up until the time of the American Revolution. Yeah, but this AME church, AME churches are basically segregated because you don't have a lot of white membership there, obviously, but at the same time, it is an institution which whites in cities, whether it be Philadelphia and other places where the AME churches are thriving and successful, make folks in town a little bit uneasy. And it's something that they sometimes monitor, have to keep tabs on. Vesey's co-conspirator is a man named Gullah Jack. So this is a community, the free people of Charleston. Vesey is a carpenter. Gullah Jack is a craftsman. There are sailors in town. That's what Charleston has basically decided to, be careful about. This idea that, all right, we have to monitor the sailors, some are black, who come into Charleston because they are doing, among other things, bringing radical, dangerous ideas. We're going to see what happens in the aftermath of this conspiracy. So they claim later on that there may have been as many. Now, whether or not this is true or not, this is where the historical record gets muddled. The historical record getting muddled will be a theme of today's lecture, by the way, because we're going to talk about Andrew Jackson's actions in Florida. So they claim as many as 9,000 individuals were part of Vesey and Gullah Jack's conspiracy. This may have been an effort to inflate the numbers so that they can get more slaves in rural areas outside of Charleston involved in this plot. Is this 5 people that are going to do this? No. We have numbers we believe are as strong as 9,000. Oh, that would embolden you. That would give you confidence that this thing has a chance to succeed. The plan relied on, of course, as conspiracies and attempted rebellions have, to rely on surprise and careful planning, which they put in place. They would attack the city arsenal. That's where you have the weapons hidden. They would move to the stores of guns. They would get ammunition. This is what you require to begin a violent overthrow or takeover of the city. Other rebels would be assigned. So you give everyone a role. Other rebels would be assigned to commandeer horses and form a cavalry unit that could move fast to, again, keep the white militia out and go on the run if they had to. The plan was to kill all the whites in the city, with any blacks who refused to join the cause. Interesting. This is not for the faint of heart. Vesey invokes Joshua from the Bible when he claims, quote, "And they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, young and old," unquote. A revolution not for the faint of heart. And when the conspiracy grows, what also grows? The chance of people finding out about the conspiracy in the planning stage. How many attempted rebellions are only attempted rebellions and footnotes in history because somebody said something or somebody heard something?
That's the best way to earn freedom, is to say, hey, they're plotting to kill you.
Why would a slave say something to someone in charge like their owner or someone else? You got it, absolutely.
And then also,
it absolves me of any involvement.
And if it fails, I'm not the one that.
Yes, because we ask the question now, how could you give up the plot when you heard about it? And that's the answer. Knowledge that anyone with a breath of suspicion and connection to this conspiracy, guilty until proven innocent. Why didn't you say anything? Did you hear something? No, I didn't hear anything. Okay, obviously they're not going to believe you, and among other things, there will be, let's just say, completely illegal methods to try to get a confession out of you.
Yeah, it's like, for example, in that book, the revolt in Louisiana.
Sure, the Rasmusson, yeah.
I mean, that was like when they did
the
interrogations.
The list of slave conspiracies are very long. The successful rebellions, not as long, because somebody says something. Mm-hmm. So by May, a slave informed his master about what he was hearing, and authorities begin an investigation. That's interesting. They just say, all right, let's see if this plot is actually legitimate, if this is really taking place. The investigation went nowhere because, for the most part, the plan was airtight. The security of the plan was airtight. And nobody knew anything. Nobody that they talked to knew anything. On June 14th, a slave who was used as a spy to pinpoint the area of the plot talked about the AME church being where everything was taking place and where the conspiracy was being planned. So from there, the authorities of South Carolina and the city of Charleston began to arrest suspects and anyone who was claimed to be a conspirator. Secret trials were held. Bail was denied anyone who was thought to be involved. Vesey was later found in late June as he was trying to leave the city. Gullah Jack was also captured. So these tribunals, these hastily assembled proceedings by which you try to have justice, arrested in short order 135 people, 35 of whom were executed, 43 were transported and sold, meaning they were basically up and sold out of the state of South Carolina. Families were broken up, 43 individuals. They didn't matter. This was a way to ensure that as a conspirator in an attempted slave rebellion, you were going to be sent out of the state, or they were sent somewhere else, maybe to the Caribbean.
What happened to the other ones that weren't executed or transported? Were they deemed innocent?
The other, sure, there wasn't enough evidence found to convict them of anything. Vesey and the ringleaders die quietly, which perturbs whites in South Carolina. It also makes the work of officials and the historians really tough. What did they plan to do? They didn't say anything. It took weeks to apprehend everyone, so we obviously can make an assumption that the evidence of what was planned was destroyed. Papers burned, records annihilated, people got their stories all straight. And the complete involvement, the scope of the conspiracy, to this day, we don't know about. Some folks claim there are a lot of irregularities among the officials who were gathering evidence. Some of the authorities simply refuse to believe that so many individuals could be involved in so well-planned of an attempt to attack whites and any black man or woman who was siding with the whites. Some historians believe that the efforts of the governor and judges put this whole conspiracy story together. So that's an interesting alternative, right? They're the ones who concocted the conspiracy and elevated the number of people who were actually involved. Others say, how do you rely on coerced confessions? People will say anything if they're tortured. Some of the slaves may have been, again, brought in by white authorities and told them what they wanted to hear. So the record is muddled. Maybe the tribunal conclusions are more revealing about the white fears than the real plot. There's a theory also. We know this: Vesey is part of the AME Church, which is critical of slavery. What happens afterwards? We still don't know. Now, historians have theories. There are whole entire texts on the Vesey conspiracy. Is he a victim of white paranoia? It's hard to believe that he would go so quietly to his execution. But maybe he did. Maybe he put a pact together with the leaders that said, we don't say a damn thing as we go to the gallows. In the aftermath, white Charlestonians are convinced, and here's a quote from someone in the town, our Negroes are truly the Jacobins of the country, meaning the rebels who sided with the French Revolution. And so Charleston, not surprisingly, begins to pass laws that limit the movement of free blacks in the population. Religious gatherings are limited, must be supervised, and also any kind of communications that happens between denominations of churches outside of the state. They also, and this is, international incident all over it, this particular decision. When sailors arrive in Charleston, black sailors, they are locked up until the ship they are assigned to leaves the harbor. When they get ready to weigh anchor, again, the sailors are basically all told, look, we're going to load up. It's going to happen in 3-4 days, whatever. But no, the black sailors are basically told you're going to be in a penitentiary, imprisoned. This breaks both the treaty with Great Britain and it is a violation of the federal Constitution. It also has and I would say is part of an effect of helping John Calhoun, who in 1810 is an economic nationalist, who had been for the recharter of the bank. In 1815, he's for the tariff of 1816. He begins to turn politically 180 degrees and abandon his economic nationalism and instead embrace the ideas of defending slavery and South Carolina. I think the Missouri Compromise is part of it. I would call it, I should trademark this phrase, the Calhoun conversion. It's Missouri, it's Vesey, it's the tariff and nullification, and maybe it's even Nat Turner, 1831. The Turner Rebellion, 60 whites killed in Northampton, Virginia. Okay, we'll switch the notes here and talk a little bit about the so-called era of good feelings and the Monroe administration. You can tell that, no, this looks okay here. My notes, you can tell this has been kind of put together different ways. The font is a little bit different here, but Monroe. Let's take a look at James Monroe, something of a throwback politician because he is, most historians have acknowledged, I disagree because I think it's Andrew Jackson, but most historians say he is the last veteran of the American Revolution to become president. Jackson was captured as a 13-year-old and attacked by a British officer during the Revolution. So, okay, but James Monroe, there it is. The third in the Virginia dynasty, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and the last president attached to the American Revolution. That's the conventional wisdom of historians. Again, maybe it's just, again, just my nitpicking with that. He crossed the Delaware with Washington, the famous and inaccurate painting of the Lutza painting of the soldiers crossing the Delaware. All of them would be at the bottom of the Delaware if you try to put that many men on a boat. He was wounded in a charge against the Hessian position at the Battle of Trenton. So he does have real connections to the Revolution. He also looked like a man from the 1770s in the 1820s. He still wore knee breeches, not stylish anymore. He wore buckled shoes. They had given those up 2 generations before. And the fabled tri-cornered hat, which is just the farmer's floppy hat that you just sewed up 2 sides of it so it came to a point. The tri-corner hat associated with the American Revolution. He still wore all that. He was independent in his 58 years before he became president. He opposed ratification of the Constitution. He's an anti-federalist. He alone prevents, along with others in Virginia, more accurately, prevents James Madison from getting the job he wanted after the Constitutional Convention, and that was senator from Virginia. And so Madison becomes a congressman from Virginia. The Quids, the third wave Republicans, as they were called, the Latin term tertium quids, the third way, had put him, Monroe, up against James Madison for president in 1808, except that the caucus chooses Madison instead. So that's where their rivalry reaches something of an apex in 1808, and the two eventually had a reconciliation because, like every good president, we again talk about Lincoln and his team of rivals. That's the book on Lincoln's cabinet. Everybody who wanted Lincoln's job, he gives them a position in the cabinet. And they all think he can do a better job than Lincoln, of course, especially Seward. But what do you do with the team of rivals? In this case, you put your rival, Monroe, in your cabinet. And it's a good way to say, look, it's my time now. Yours may come later on. And during the time of the Madison administration, Monroe goes so far as to running both the State and War Department during the dark days of the War of 1812. And more, like his political mentor, James Madison, we can call James Monroe something of an economic nationalist. We'll see that unfold, certainly with his foreign policy decisions. He works well with all wings of the party. That's something that Madison doesn't always have good control of the party during his presidency. He's good at conciliation, and has, more importantly, a very firm grasp of foreign affairs and the challenges in foreign affairs for the United States in the 18 teens and the 1820s. He believed that there is constitutional sanction for internal improvements. So again, that idea of him being an economic nationalist. He supports the tariff. In his enthusiasm for everything American, he got carried away. He at one point said, and I quote, "On whom has oppression fallen in any quarter of our Union? Who has been deprived of any right or person or property?" Unquote. He said this with a straight face. Monroe assumes that no one, of course, could claim that there was oppression in any quarter of our Union. The 1.5 million American slaves might beg to differ, or Indians or women, about this completely inaccurate quote. They've called out on this. Again, if we were transported 200 years before, the president and the audience would have been startled and then irritated by this notion that, slaves, women, and Indians might object to your bull quote, Mr. President. That's a silly notion, they would have said. But it's true. Can't deny that. So it is Monroe's presidency that typically we associate with one-party government. The Federalists had run their last presidential candidate in 1816. There was this optimism that strife, remember, at the end of the War of 1812, strife in politics was a thing of the past. The Federalists were no longer an alternative. Hell, even John Quincy Adams switched parties and becomes a Republican. Monroe goes to the beginning of his presidency and sets out on a triumphal national tour, even going to New England. He climbs Bunker Hill on July 4th, again, making that connection to the American Revolution. A Boston Federalist newspaper welcomes the presidential visit as a start of what this newspaper calls an era of good feelings, and the name has stuck ever since. Partisanship, however, and bad feelings did continue even among the Republican Party in Monroe's administration. Why? Everyone in his cabinet wants to replace, when he retires, James Monroe. Maybe it's not a team of rivals, it's a team of who gets to be president after the old man retires. The closest concession to a Federalist in the cabinet is John Quincy Adams, who runs the State Department, son of the former president, and many have argued one of the most successful secretaries of state in American history. It had crushed Henry Clay that he didn't get the job. Clay wanted the job. It is seen back then as the springboard to the presidency. Let's go through this very quickly. Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, all secretaries of state, presidents as well. Didn't hurt that you were from Virginia. We know that this really irked the Federalists, trying to change the rules about the Constitution at the end of the War of 1812, but you can't deny it. I mean, 2 of the 36 years of the history of the nation, and only for John Adams, the first John Adams, someone outside Virginia, was president. Many Republicans feel pretty solidly that the heir apparent to the presidency, I'm going to go through and show you some of the portraits of these individuals, would be this man. This is William Crawford, who is appointed Secretary of the Treasury. The War Department goes to a rising light. Okay. This is a daguerreotype of him later in life. This is John C. Calhoun.
He looks like Frankenstein. Yeah.
Okay, there's Calhoun, a little bit younger, maybe more accurate to his. This is him towards the 1840s. Here he is, maybe
That's
around.
just a freaky picture. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
He just looks disturbed and pissed off, which he probably was.
At that point in his career, yes, more and more. John Calhoun, again, this is a strong set of appointments for the most part. Calhoun's seen, again, as a rising light. Calhoun's going to run the War Department. everyone in the cabinet wants Monroe's job. Crawford is the only non-economic nationalist in the cabinet. So you have Adams and Calhoun. Calhoun at the time, we're talking now 1816, again, for the tariff, for the idea of internal improvements. But the idea of putting this group in your cabinet did work, in the short run at least. Monroe will win every electoral vote but one in 1820 when he runs for re-election. Someone throws in a vote for John Quincy Adams just to make sure that Washington is the only president who wins every electoral vote twice. And that, to this day, that's still the record.
This him and then Reagan are the only two to have 49 states to vote for them for president, except for one. Right?
Well, there weren't that many. Yeah, well, again, it's
all
just
the states except for one. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I don't know the, well, I don't know the breakdown of the actual election.
Favorite maps, because he won every state except for that one guy.
Okay, here's 1816. So he wins every, yeah. Pretty overwhelming. You won a couple, this is 18, I don't, yeah. So it would have been basically every state in 1820. I don't know, I don't have a map of the 1820 election. Reagan 84 won everything but Minnesota.
I think so.
And Washington, D.C. 1936, FDR gets 520 electoral votes to like 6. I don't know if the state breakdown, but his re-election in the middle of the Great Depression, it's another overwhelming. Yeah, we probably won't see that ever again. Okay, so let's go back to the notes here. So, you know, it works out for Monroe, at least for 8 years. I don't want you to think that just because you are claim to be in the same party, that you don't have differences of opinion. We see that played out in the cabinet. Monroe expects and wanted one-party rule to evolve in his time as president. He claims to be nonpartisan. So again, it's a kind of a throwback to the idea of what Washington was talking about. The opposite happened. Instead, the Republican Party ceased to have a lot of coherence. It became splintered. There was internal division. During the war, it reappeared in the aftermath of the war as well. Then, of course, to throw that all in, you have sectional issues. And it makes the era of good feelings a potential danger. Or I believe in this giant book that I've referenced a lot, he calls this particular chapter the era of good and bad feelings. So there you have it. Support, you know, what you can do if you're Monroe, and this is his goal. If you have challenges that we've already talked about, you have the Panic of 1819, you have the Missouri Compromise and the Missouri Crisis. These are domestic challenges that threaten the idea of nonpartisanship and one-party government. So how do you try to solidify the Republican Party and make it a legacy of your time as president? Well, what you do is achieve results in foreign policy, and you revisit ideas and you revisit the, what we might say, unresolved border issues after the War of 1812. So it begins with our most recent opponent in the war. That is, of course, Great Britain. The first agreement, and Monroe and Adams worked together with this, is in 1817. It's called the Rush-Bagot Treaty. And what that provides for, again, we're going to go through the foreign policy successes here of President Monroe and Secretary of State Adams. It provides for the gradual naval disarmament of the Great Lakes. And you might think, the disarmament of the Great Lakes, what in the world does that have to do with, you know, foreign policy? Or, well, once upon a time, before the Soviet Union and the United States aimed nuclear missiles at each other, and there was a missile gap, and they have more intercontinental ballistic missiles than we do, so on and so forth. The way that you possibly could bring about a conflict in neutral waters, the Great Lakes, shared by British Canada and the United States, is that you race to build warships on the Great Lakes. So we are basically disarming the Great Lakes in this treaty in 1817, naval disarmament. It proves to be a remarkably durable treaty. Both sides say it's great. It's not going to cost us a lot to have a race to build naval ships. If you don't think it's a big issue, think about before World War I, where you had the German Navy and the British Navy building these things called dreadnoughts, these super battleships, which lead to, among other things, some of the greatest naval battles, Jutland in 1916. So if you can cut out that, it prevents an incident on the Great Lakes from becoming an all-out war once again. So there's that. Neither side really trusts the other, even with this treaty in place, because this is an international border. So it's going to take a while to establish that. It's followed by the Anglo-American Convention of 1818. Let's go to the map because we need it for this. Again, you start in small steps, incremental steps, to establish trust between the two nations, and then hopefully you succeed diplomatically. All right, here's what several of the treaties we're going to talk about today look like on paper. The Anglo-American Convention of 1818. It goes back to the colonial days and the issue of fishing rights. The convention between the American and English government redefines the rights given to Yankee fishermen along Newfoundland and the Labrador coast off of Canada. This is fishing and whaling. Again, don't want to have an international incident. Don't want to have a tension with Great Britain. Again, a continent that is exhausted in the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars doesn't want anything to start again. The negotiations for the Anglo-American Convention also fixed the boundary between the United States and Canada. You can see that at the top of this map. It's called the U.S.-British Treaty Line of 1818. Specifically, it follows a line that we will use in the future. This is this nice straight line at the top of the map, the 49th parallel of latitude. Remember how, you know how you keep them straight, right? Latitude lines get smaller as you go up towards the poles. Longitude are the same because they're going this way instead of this way. Latitude versus longitude. If you'd like, I could give you the stalagmite, stalactite in the caverns. No, okay, that's good. You can keep those straight. You're shaking your heads now. Anywho, how about how you know the Great Lakes? Holmes, H-O-M-E-S? No, you know that one? Okay. How about the first 10 presidents? No? Okay, we're good. Okay, so what's that?
Yeah, the song.
What's the song?
Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Adams, Jackson, Benjamin. Yeah. They tried to.
See, we came up with in grade school, what a joke. My mother always jokes very happily tonight.
Oh.
No? Okay.
Who was
Moving on.
Who was president when you were in grade school?
Really? Really?
Tonight.
Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah, because we had the song, it was all of them. It was like, I was like, I keep losing track after like 5 because I'm trying to think which one comes next.
No, go from Jackson to Lincoln. That's when everybody gets thrown off, or from Lincoln to Wilson. That's when the one-term non-memorable presidents. Okay, so what do we do to solve the area beyond? We're really off the map, off the Louisiana Purchase. So we settled the 49th parallel between British Canada and the United States, but Great Britain and the United States also agree to jointly occupy what's called then the Oregon Country. Okay, so it's the area in red, joint occupation, which is renewed with Great Britain, but it's first established in 1818. So for the next 10 years, Americans and British will use the Oregon Country to basically trap furs.
Okay.
Now the mindset of Monroe and especially Adams is this. This is the best we can get. I mean, we have no claim to the territory other than it's on North America. Also, by the way, with the joint occupation of Great Britain and the United States, this agreement ignores the fact that both the Spanish and the Russians have a claim to the area. So we're just like, nah, we're not even going to talk to them. We're going to only talk to the only legitimate nation that has a claim, that's Great Britain. And what we're doing by this agreement is saying in 10 years, and Adams predicts this correctly, it might take longer than 10 years, but maybe in a generation, we'll be able to, by force of Americans settling there, more Americans than English people will be able to take the territory. And he's right, it happens under President Polk, right? And John Quincy Adams at that point is in Congress, former president, the only former president to get elected. Well, to serve in Congress. I believe John Tyler was elected and never served. What's that?
Yeah, I think he was the only freshman senator, like whatever, to be president before he got elected into the Congress.
To get elected before and after.
Yeah,
he was Quincy Adams was a senator, but Andrew Jackson was a senator too.
Yeah.
But he doesn't go back. I mean, this whole idea of I was president. Why should I go back and do something as lowly as serve in the House? Well, the president's powers were very limited back then, and John Quincy Adams wasn't too proud to acknowledge the fact that the people of Massachusetts liked him enough, and his post-presidential career is the greatest post-presidential career ever. With all due respect to every president that builds their library, builds houses, or does whatever they do, I mean, that's pretty impressive. And that's up against people like Taft, who were Chief Justice of the Supreme Court after they were president. Taft always said, that's the job I really wanted. I didn't like to be president, but he got to be Chief Justice. So that was something there as well. Okay, so that solves the issue, at least with Great Britain, one of two of the European powers that we're going to have to deal with when we're talking about North America. Relations with Spain, Spain, turn out to be more problematic. Now, let's take a look at a map of, I hopefully have it. Yes, Florida. The problem as far as the United States is concerned, this is West Florida, East and West Florida. The problem is that three rivers, the Pearl, Mississippi, and Louisiana border, the Perdido, and the Apalachicola rivers all drain into the Gulf. You drive over or near these places as you head into the wonderful places in the Florida Panhandle. When you go to the beach, the Escambia River near Pensacola, the Apalachicola River is a little bit further east of that. They drain into the Gulf. So what? Well, if you live in Alabama, you got to get through Florida to get your products out to the Gulf and the greater Atlantic. So this is all controlled by Spain, and it leads to many pressing issues, including the fact that Florida, and no one can deny this, is a haven for runaway slaves in the American South, from Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. Spain had also been very distracted by what? The Napoleonic Wars. They're shifting soldiers out of Florida to Europe. Because what? Napoleon moves into Spain. So this is as far as the United States is concerned, golden opportunity. There is also an element of, we could say it no other way, racial warfare. That did not end with the Treaty of Ghent in 1815. In 1816, American amphibious expeditions converge on this area. This is called, it is on the Apalachicola River, which is traditionally the divide between West Florida and East Florida. You can see the schematic to the north. It's called the Negro Fort. It is occupied by Spanish soldiers and runaway slaves, some who have been rechristened Black Seminoles. This is the beginning of what will be known as the First Seminole War in American history. after the destruction of the Negro Fort, which is basically blown up, the United States government builds a fort near the river and the Gulf. You can see it at the bottom of this drawing. That's Fort Gadsden. So an amphibious expedition converges on the Negro Fort in 1816. It is seen as the most powerful, they would have used the word maroon community, runaways, in North America. And during a naval bombardment of the Negro Fort, a cannon shell goes into the fort and hits the powder magazine, blows up the whole fort. 270 people are killed. The survivors are rounded up. Some are tortured. Those that lived, 60 of them, are taken to Alabama and Georgia and sold into slavery. How can that be, you ask? Well, it's a violation of the 1807 provision that says slaves from foreign territory cannot move into the United States. Whoopsie! Yeah, they blatantly broke that rule. The Spanish, then no one can deny this, allow Florida to become a haven for African Americans and Indians fleeing the United States. The administration going back to Thomas Jefferson had tried to take off bites of Florida in 1810 and 1813. You can see it represented here in this map of the First Seminole War and the very end of the War of 1812. It had been, Jefferson who claimed that West Florida was part of the Louisiana Purchase. The French were like, I don't know, go check with the Spanish. And the Spanish said, no, I don't think so. So like his predecessors, Monroe pursues this idea that we have to somehow wrestle the Floridas, plural, from the nation of Spain. The only conclusion he comes to when he becomes president in 1817 is that we have to pursue the complete acquisition of both Floridas. Spain has to sell it or give it up. Both Jefferson and Madison rattle sabers in their administrations. Madison even supports what are called freebooters. These are folks who are American citizens in Georgia who try to basically cause a rebellion among the Spanish civil authority in East Florida. Not successful. What did it remind everybody of? Well, it reminded everyone of the West Florida Rebellion in 1810. That centered around what? The Felicianas in St. Francisville. Again, there's a museum still there for the Museum of the Republic of West Florida. So if that had worked and we detached that little area in the green color, east of Baton Rouge up to the Pearl River, and then we basically annexed the Mobile district during the war, why not continue with that idea? Well, what we're trying to do is tell the Spanish that your days in Florida are numbered. The most controversial episode to get the area begins with the outright invasion of Florida by Andrew Jackson in 1818. More creeks had begun to trickle into Florida after their defeat in 1814, the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. We know that this was a Creek civil war because Jackson used not only Creek but Cherokee allies to pursue the Red Stick Creeks. It brought about their destruction in the spring of 1814 and basically turned half of Alabama, the Treaty of Fort Jackson, over to the United States government, a treaty that the government in Washington, D.C. tried to walk back in 1815, but it was too late. Jackson had already sent surveyors in, and that land was already being divided up and seized by Americans swarming into the Southwest. This is known as the First Florida War, sometimes called the First Seminole War. Now, there's controversy about the name Seminole. We think it might literally mean maroon communities. It's a Spanish word for Cimarron, that when the English took possession of Florida, it just became anglicized to Seminole. The Seminole Indians are Creek Indians, Indians from South Carolina and Georgia who were displaced over the generations and settled in Florida. Seminole Indians. we are changing names and mascots across the United States. It's the Washington football team right now. It's not the Redskins anymore. But I think it's interesting that I haven't seen a similar effort by Florida State.
Actually, I know.
Or are they?
No.
They
The Seminole, actually, the Seminole tribe they said we don't mind.
If you like anti-government kind of actions and fighting against the United States and frustrating the government, the Seminole Wars. Now, the second Seminole War is beyond scope of this class. But I'll tell you what happens when the Seminoles were told to evacuate, right? This is with the Indian removal. The Cherokee go to court, the Seminole fight. The Seminole in East Florida fight. And the Americans moved down there in 1835, send a force to start rounding up, they get annihilated. It's called the Dale Massacre. They send in 100-odd soldiers, and they are just wiped out. And for the next 7 years, the United States rolls in all these commanders. Now, they make promises that to me are eerily like Vietnam. You hear things like, well, we had to destroy the village to save the village. Victory is around the corner. There's light at the end of the tunnel. All the while, they spent more just fighting the Seminoles than all of the budget they had dedicated to moving the 5 Indian nations to the Oklahoma Territory. So this is the first of the Seminole Wars. The second is longer, and 3 presidents supervise it basically, until finally they tricked the Indian leader Osceola into surrendering, and they finally sign a treaty with enough of the Seminoles that they move in the 1840s. But again, so yeah, that of all the changes, the Chiefs, the Atlanta Braves, again, the Fighting Illini in Illinois, the idea that the only Indian that is a fighting Indian is militaristic and such, and that's changed. Again, it's not happened the same way to the Seminoles, so that's interesting. But so they basically are okay. They say we're okay with the name, yeah.
I think they also get some kind of payment. I don't know. I'm in Dr. Rios' American Indians and class. And we have read books, and one of the chapters is about kind of like that. And yeah, it just said that they agreed with the college to keep using it because they didn't mind it. Yeah, and I think they gave them the rights. I mean, I think they get so much money. I don't really know.
They didn't mention it in the
Okay, so Jackson goes in. This is where, when we're talking about the historical record and the controversy about Denmark Vesey, this is where things get interesting, connecting with Jackson in the First Seminole War. The Army is ordered by Calhoun to go in. Now, the commander who preceded Jackson is a man named General Gaines. He goes into Amelia Island, which is near the Georgia and South Carolina border, to try to flush out any rebels. The problem is pursuing Black Seminoles and not engaging the Spanish. So that's what Gaines is basically told. And then Jackson replaces Gaines, and they think, should we give Jackson like new orders? And Jackson basically says, no, I'm just going to follow Gaines's orders. Sweep through Florida, and to end any potential of Florida itself becoming a magnet for runaway slaves and these maroon communities. The one symbol was taken out when they blew up the Negro Fort in 1816. It's not surprising that the administration turns to Jackson because he has a reputation as someone who can get things done. But his instructions say, do not attack Spanish troops or outposts. Though it may not be clear if Jackson understood these orders very well, there seems to be a miscommunication with the cabinet. What was he supposed to do? It wasn't clear at all. Are you giving the orders very vague because you're going to go wait and see what Jackson does? And if he does things that you don't want him to do, you can have what's called plausible deniability. Oh, he told Jackson not to do that, and he went and did it. This story is in the book here. I mean, on the Seminole War, and it's the first version of the story where it's completely unclear what Jackson maybe was supposed to do. He had orders, but how far he was supposed to go to carry out these orders, and the expectation of the administration is, it's a little bit vague. Jackson makes war on Seminole villages along the Florida and Alabama border. That happens beginning in 1818. The problem he faces is that he cannot draw out the Seminoles to a full on-scale battle. It doesn't happen. They disappear into the swamps of Florida. And it frustrates him the same way in his campaign in Alabama in 1813. He reaches a Spanish fort here at St. Mark's in East Florida. He demands their surrender there, which he wasn't really supposed to do. I mean, he didn't attack it. He just got there and said, turn this over to the United States. And while he was there at St. Mark's, he arrested a British trader. Trader, not traitor. Someone who traded with the Spanish and Seminole Indians. He moves east to attack Seminole villages from St. Mark's along the Suwannee River, and he finds a couple of Indian leaders. He also is hoping to raid black Seminole villages and find the fugitives who are led by two gentlemen named Abraham and Nero. They're long gone. They disappear into central peninsula of Florida. Jackson's forces could only burn homes, seize livestock, and arrest yet another British official. So now he's got two of them under arrest. His army rests very briefly, collects any kind of war booty that they are entitled to, and march back to St. Mark's. Now that they're at the old Spanish fort, which is now under the control of the United States, he has a trial and executes both British officials.
Oh my God.
Yep, that's what the administration, basically their answer was as well. He did what? Yeah, let's go back to the notes and we'll pull up the map again as we continue. The 3-day trial. These gentlemen are not provided a defense counsel and they are not allowed to call witnesses on their behalf.
What's the problem? The 3-day?
Yeah, so it's a 3-day hastily assembled, basically military tribunal. The sentence is that one man was to be executed, one man was to be lashed and then exiled. Jackson said, nope, don't want to give the guy a chance to appeal. He changed the sentence to death. I know, I'm not laughing out of the tragedy that happens there, but just... What's that? How did he become? Jackson, by the way, if you're wondering what he did before, he was General of Volunteers, and then he got an actual commission in the United States Army. He is a former justice of the Tennessee State Supreme Court.
Oh my God.
There is no way these convictions would have held up in a legitimate court. He then writes Calhoun, his boss, the Secretary of War in the Monroe Cabinet. I quote, the execution of these two unprincipled villains will prove an awful example, unquote, to the British government and public. No, they don't. They prove to be the beginning of an international incident with the nation of Great Britain. How did he get elected president? Enough people supported his actions and got over that. How did he get to be president? Stay tuned because there's more to this story. Because what's that?
He can like. He's one of the people.
He can be connected to the Battle of New Orleans. He could run as an outsider. The outsider idea has real appeal in American politics. Now, he was a senator when he runs for president, but he has this whole idea that, does this sound familiar? I'm not part of the problem. I haven't been in Washington. drain the swamp, other things we've said over the years. The corruption. Democrats have been in charge for FDR, Truman. I mean, when the Republicans lose a 1932 election, they don't win another election for president until 1952. 20 years. But that they can say things like, and Jackson says things like that. You know, the corruption of the previous administrations, the scandal that's going to be involved in one of his competitors for the office, Crawford. Okay. Rumors reached the army of Seminoles now gathering at Pensacola in West Florida. That's untrue. But the rumors are good enough as far as Jackson are concerned. Jackson then welcomes the move into effectively the Spanish capital of West Florida. He then makes a promise when he gets outside Pensacola to the Spanish authorities. Quote, "I will put to death every man found in arms," unquote. Now, by 1818, you know that when Andrew Jackson makes a threat, you actually should believe it. This is a man who at least once has turned his own guns on his own soldiers who threatened to go home because their enlistments were up. Well, he said the campaign wasn't over. The first man that moves, I'm going to shoot. So there you go. The Spanish governor then evacuates the area and surrenders Pensacola in May of 1818. Jackson then says, oh, you can surrender and that's fine, but I want you to move all your soldiers out and back to Havana and Cuba. And they do. In short order, Jackson then appoints a territorial governor for West Florida, appoints a collector of customs, thanks the Army for his service, which included Seminole allies, Creek allies, Tennessee volunteers, elements of the United States Army, and then goes home. In Florida, the Seminoles, both red and black, relocate their communities farther down the peninsula. Can't live in the Panhandle anymore. The U.S. is there to stay. There is an uproar in Washington, D.C. Yeah. Monroe hears about what happened, the execution of the two British citizens, reading it in the newspaper. Then it becomes official. The press attack Andrew Jackson. Diplomats who are stationed in the United States, not only representing Spain but Great Britain, demand an explanation. And Monroe says, yeah, let's talk about this, kind of wild card of a general who is now somewhat of a lawless renegade general, and brings up the idea with his cabinet of what we should do next. It's one thing, he says, to pursue desperados raiding U.S. lands. It's another to replace Spanish authority in Florida, which he was told specifically not to do. Secretary of War Calhoun has the most to lose in the affair. Oh, and this is when things get really interesting, right? He has to be protective of himself, because if it's his directions that are given to both Gaines, Jackson's predecessor, and Jackson, it would make him not look very good. So he could be accused, as Secretary of War, of mismanagement. Calhoun argues that the administration should distance itself from Andrew Jackson and possibly bring up the idea of a court-martial. Crawford agrees. Why would they say it? Well, obviously it's what we call CYA, right? Y'all know what that means. He's a rival. He's a rival.
It was justified.
The court-martial? Probably.
Because he defied orders. He was specifically told, do not overthrow Spanish authority.
Everyone agrees, but John Quincy Adams. The government can use Jackson's conduct to their advantage. Now he could take the case, John Quincy Adams, negotiating with his Spanish counterpart, Mr. O'Neill, O-N-I-S, Mr. O'Neill, and say that Spain has lost control in Florida by you, the nation of Spain, not preventing these raids into American territory in Alabama and Mississippi. We had no choice. Professor Howe in this book also brings up the notion that Jackson may have changed the record, or the Monroe administration changed the record about what his orders exactly were. Monroe, deliberate as he was, do you want, they gave him the option. The Monroe administration went to Jackson and said, do you want to alter the orders that you were given to protect your actions there? Jackson said, no, my orders were clear. I followed the orders that General Gaines had. You didn't have to restate them. I've seen the orders of General Gaines. I carried it out. So it's a way to just kind of change things up the record. Why? Because Monroe's fearing a congressional investigation of his general's conduct in Florida. So there's an outcry in the press. There's an outcry in the diplomatic corps. Something must be done. So the first question is, all right, do we discipline the general? The cabinet seems to be in agreement, except for Quincy Adams. He says, no, this is not an opportunity for knocking Jackson to the side. This could make him even more popular, I think he would argue. It's an opportunity to us to remind the Spanish that your days in Florida are numbered.
Well, then they were over because.
They were. Monroe, deliberate as he was, adopt Adams's plan. Let's not discipline Jackson or call the court martial. And then later says he, the president, did not authorize these actions, which he exactly did. So there was gray areas in Jackson's orders. There really were. So again, I would suggest if you want to read more into this, it's a fascinating story. And Monroe plays that game. He promises that Spanish authority would be restored in Pensacola. He scolds Jackson for acting on his own authority, but then makes that offer that I just mentioned. We can't change the record, though. We can change what your orders were, so it doesn't look as bad on your sake. Jackson turns down the offer. But sure enough, Congress can't help itself. It decides to assemble, when it assembles in December 1818, that's when the congressional sessions were at the end of the year. It is Henry Clay who introduces, I'm sorry, I'll change the notes here. There we go. Okay. Clay decides to introduce 4 resolutions which essentially give Congress oversight and see the documents and find out what in the world was going on in Florida. The Congress makes a couple of decisions and comes to, more effectively said, a couple of conclusions about the entire incident. The war had been essentially brought on, the Seminole War, Jackson's actions in Florida, had been brought on by an unjust treaty with the Creeks. And Jackson had signed that treaty, Treaty of Fort Jackson, that turned over about half of Alabama. The case against the English, that they were spies, that they were supplying arms. The one English official who was executed said, I've actually been encouraging the Seminole not to attack the United States. And no one really believed him. So these are the different resolutions. Again, the war had been brought about by an unjust treaty with the Creeks. Jackson had signed that treaty into law. He had gone beyond his authority at the end of the Creek War.
Can you repeat that one again?
Sure. These are the resolutions that are going to go in front of Congress, engineered by Speaker of the House Henry Clay. The war, the Seminole War, the First Florida War, whatever we're calling it now, have been brought about because of the treaty with the Creeks that dates to 1814. And pushed the Creeks into Florida. Jackson had signed that treaty, the Treaty of Fort Jackson. The government tried to walk away from it, but in the end, President Madison endorsed it. The second resolution essentially said the case against the English, by which Jackson executed these 2 British officials, was pretty weak. Jackson should have also understood his limits, that he was limited with his orders in Florida. After 3 weeks of argument, the resolutions criticizing Andrew Jackson were voted down.
The last one that Jackson didn't have.
Should have understood that the case for executing them as agents or spies was not a bulletproof case that would have held up. You should have known better. And yeah, you know, with his history as a judge, that would have made sense. So they argue about this in the Congress. Jackson no doubt has his allies, and they can't get a majority to support these resolutions. So we think at that point the matter might be over. Spain hoped that an international outcry would happen if not taken seriously, you know, the Spanish complaints, maybe the fact that Jackson killed 2 British people, that they had been executed. Maybe that, you know, would cause an international incident. But the British decided that they like the new post-war economic trading relationship with the United States. They don't push the matter.
It's okay.
It's just too profitable to threaten over these 2 poor, they were actually Scotsmen.
Oh, so that's why.
Maybe that's an element too. The Foreign Secretary essentially sacrifices 2 Scots for continued good relations between the United States and Great Britain. That's what it comes down to, in its very simplest form. Ignoring the press in both England and the West Indies, the British minister continues dealing with Adams. The Spanish do cool off when the Americans restore St. Mark's to Spain, evacuating our soldiers. We also restore Pensacola to the Spanish authority, but not interesting the old Negro fort, which we rebuild and call Fort Gadsden, there on the Apalachicola River. Jackson was treated to a hero's welcome when he arrives back in Washington, D.C. He never acknowledges the role John Quincy Adams played in basically diverting any attempt to have him court-martialed. People will tell him that later on, but he can't get over, of course, the election results of 1824, where Adams, he feels, stole the presidency. People bring that to his attention because during the election of 1824, when everyone's taking sides and you've got Calhoun in there for a while, and Crawford, and Adams, and Jackson, you know, it's brought to his attention about what Calhoun has wanted to do also. So he never acknowledges that Adams may have saved him from the court-martial and the public humiliation. But he never also forgives Henry Clay and the resolutions that Clay introduced that were condemning his behavior in Florida. He doesn't easily forgive, and he never forgets. Okay. We are going to leave things there for now.